working the graveyard shift at a remote medical facility. She was simply doing her job until the moment she positioned herself between gunfire and an injured person she'd never met. Nobody gave her account any credence. Yet her companion's investigation revealed a clandestine network of former soldiers, covert transport operations, and an unspoken pledge that outsiders rarely encounter. What explains the appearance of a dozen wordless figures stationed beyond her recovery room? Here's the account they attempted to suppress but failed to eliminate. The overhead fluorescent bulbs blinked intermittently as Teresa Williams ended her shift, massaging her stiff neck while bidding farewell to the drowsy front desk worker. The clock showed almost 2 a.m., and the quietness stretching past the vehicle area seemed dense, as though nature itself paused in anticipation. At T28 years old, Teresa had become accustomed to the quietness of these midnight hours. Positioned beyond a rest stop along a desolate highway stretch, the medical center rarely encountered anything more serious than minor injuries, fevers, or the intermittent weary motorist seeking a brief examination before continuing their route. Draping her coat across her medical clothing, she raised her hood to block the encroaching mist and ventured into the frigid darkness. Her aging Toyota awaited at the parking area's distant edge. Beyond that lay the back route she traveled nightly, winding behind a series of abandoned storage buildings to reduce her drive home by 10 minutes. The location had earned an unsavory standing. Poor illumination, unreliable phone signals, a spot where people claimed transport drivers discharged items that weren't always properly documented. However, Teresa possessed a fearless nature. Exhaustion consumed her, and her feline companion needed feeding. Gravel made crunching sounds under her athletic shoes as she moved swiftly along the lot's perimeter onto the damaged narrow pathway. The storage facilities rose on her left side, their outlines consumed by the mist. Her exhaled breath created fog, mixing with the far-off sound of an idling 18-wheeler. Then came a noise, a heavy impact, an abrupt groan, and the sound of metal objects hitting pavement. Teresa halted. Her hand moved reflexively toward her pocket, clutching her cellular device. She peered toward the passage between two storage buildings. The mist churned and separated sufficiently to show a figure staggering from the darkness. He dropped forward onto the ground near the pavement's boundary, his form motionless. Teresa remained still for an instant, then rushed forward. "Excuse me," she shouted, kneeling at his side. His outer garment was drenched, not merely from precipitation, but with something thicker and darker, blood. His coat appeared worn and damaged, the left arm almost completely torn. She couldn't distinguish his features, only matted dark locks and shaking hands gripping something fabric-wrapped within his coat. "I work in healthcare," she said softly, uncertain whether he maintained awareness. "Everything will be fine. You're protected now. Please remain conscious." She searched for her phone, attempting to contact emergency services with unsteady fingers. That's when the gunshot sounded. A lone crack, piercing and immediate. Something burning tore through her upper leg's rear section. Teresa cried out, falling next to the figure. Agony shot through her entire body. Her phone slid across the concrete. She perceived nothing, just swirling mist and the storage wall to her left. The assailant stayed invisible, but the figure stirred slightly. His mouth moved, forming words she couldn't fully comprehend. His hand, still clutching that wrapped object to his torso, gradually extended toward her. She refused to allow his death. She pulled herself forward, her body protesting with pain, using herself as a shield for him. Another moment elapsed, then quietness returned. Whoever had discharged the weapon had disappeared into the fog as rapidly as they'd emerged. When the emergency vehicle arrived, summoned by a truck operator who detected her scream, only Teresa remained, wounded, trembling, bewildered. The figure had vanished 2 hours afterward. Teresa occupied a hospital bed, her limb wrapped in bandages, her suffering diminished by medication, yet her thoughts remained completely alert. Another person was present. She stated for the fourth occasion to the law enforcement officer positioned near her bed's base. He'd been shot. He was losing blood rapidly. I attempted to shield him. I was shot in the process. The deputy shut his notepad. We've examined the location. No blood evidence. No indication of another individual. Surveillance equipment was non-functional. Your colleague mentioned your exhaustion. You might have experienced confusion. I'm a trauma care professional, she responded sharply. I don't imagine hemorrhaging. He existed. Perhaps, he answered, showing disbelief. However, absent proof, Teresa remained awake well after their departure, gazing at the overhead surface. Her limb pulsed with pain. Her thoughts spun chaotically. Another individual had been present, someone facing danger. And now he disappeared, along with whatever he'd been safeguarding beneath that coat. The vision tormented her, that cloth-covered item held so firmly, his partially spoken phrases, the shot from within the fog. She understood what she'd witnessed. She knew she hadn't fabricated the suffering, the terror, or the blood. Yet the surrounding world continued onward. No formal inquiry, no media coverage, merely silence. And somewhere beyond, someone desired her to cease inquiring. The recovery room carried scents of disinfectant and inexpensive plastic, with walls colored like dampened paper. Teresa sat upright carefully, grimacing as her sutures strained against injured tissue. Her limb was propped up, tightly wrapped and throbbing. The projectile had avoided the bone, though narrowly. The medical staff claimed she was fortunate. She disagreed with that assessment. Her existence had contracted to the steady electronic monitoring sounds, the far-off movement of medical personnel, and the reverberating memory of gunfire that persisted whenever the room fell silent. The accepted narrative was straightforward. A solitary healthcare worker injured near a deserted storage facility. No surveillance, no perpetrators, no additional casualty. Investigation concluded that in this area, the chief administrator had gained notoriety for concealing violent incidents. Yet Teresa couldn't erase the sensation of the figure's blood coating her hands, or how he clutched something to his torso as though it exceeded his life's value. She attempted raising it again with hospital personnel, but they'd started regarding her as someone suffering from trauma. Compassionate, yet dismissive. One nurse even gently inquired whether she'd previously experienced vivid, false perceptions. Teresa nearly hurled a medical container at her. That afternoon, the entrance creaked and a recognizable voice interrupted the pattern. "Tell me you struck someone." "Benny," she breathed out, displaying her first genuine smile in days. Benny Alvarez, 32 years old, appeared in the entrance wearing a wrinkled sweatshirt and denim pants, carrying a foam cup containing service station coffee in one hand and a plastic sack of food items in the other. His dark curls were secured back, and his identification badge from the rest stop store still dangled from his neck. I was uncertain about your soup preference, so I purchased 3 varieties, he explained, placing the sack on her bedside surface. One contains broccoli, I believe. My apologies in advance. Teresa laughed and extended a grasp his arm. You weren't obligated to visit. You received a gunshot wound, Benny stated, his tone suddenly grave. Obviously, I had to come. He settled into the plastic seat beside her, examining her expression. Are you managing? Physically, I'll regain mobility. Mentally, she shook her head. They believe I fabricated it. The individual, the weapon, everything. Benny's brow furrowed. Do you believe you fabricated it? She stared directly at him. Absolutely not. He was genuine, and someone wanted his elimination. Benny reclined, chewing his lower lip. What if this wasn't arbitrary? What if there's more occurring here than we're meant to discover? Throughout the following 2 days, Benny transformed into her single-person investigative team. During his overnight shifts at the convenience facility, he engaged truckers in conversation, particularly those arriving after midnight. He posed casual inquiries regarding the storage district, regarding difficulties on the routes, regarding speculation. Most dismissed him. One muttered something regarding phantom freight before departing with a protein snack. Benny examined the service station surveillance recordings, hoping one might have captured Teresa's vehicle or the passage that evening. But the viewing angle didn't extend adequately. Still, he persisted in investigating. Between work periods, he revisited the storage passage. The mist had cleared, substituted by intense sunlight and arid wind. No ammunition casings, no blood evidence, merely oil marks, shattered glass, and silence. He pursued an instinct and walked behind the medical center toward the personnel entrance utilized during overnight shifts. That's when he discovered it. A small ripped piece of paper positioned just behind the entrance frame's corner. It moved slightly in the wind. Someone had secured it at a height, obviously intended for discovery. Benny removed it and examined the message written in rushed, irregular ink. The convoy is safe because of her. He didn't inform anyone immediately. He walked directly into the hospital through the main entrance this occasion and ascended to Teresa's level. As he rounded the final corner, he stopped at a figure in work footwear and a camouflage coat was positioned against the wall, just beyond her room, arms folded, gazing out the window. Another individual, older with a graying close-crop haircut, stood at the vending apparatus, not even feigning to select a snack. His forearms were visible, and Benny noticed the ink on both, faded Marine Corps tattoos. They didn't resemble hospital personnel. They didn't even resemble truckers. They resembled individuals who'd witnessed excessive hardship and communicated minimally. Benny slipped past them and entered Teresa's room. You won't believe this, he announced, displaying the paper. She read it twice, her complexion paling. That's not coincidental. There's additional information, Benny added quietly. There are individuals outside your room, military types. They're not attempting to be conspicuous, but they're observing. Observing me. I believe they're providing protection. Later that evening, just following visiting period's conclusion, the entrance creaked again. A figure entered, middle-aged, perhaps in his 50s, with a rough beard, grease-marked mechanic's clothing, and a pronounced limp. He didn't present himself. He didn't request permission. He simply approached Teresa's bedside, leaned closer, and a subdued voice stated, "He's alive." The cargo reached its destination. Then, just like that, He rotated and departed. Teresa stared at the vacant doorway, her heart pounding rapidly. "Did you hear that?" she asked Benny, who just returned with tea. "Hear what?" She relayed every word. Benny didn't laugh, didn't express doubt. He settled down gradually and stared at the note again. "Tea," he said, voice unwavering. "I believe we just landed in the middle of something far larger than we comprehend." She nodded, her pulse still accelerating. The hospital room felt transformed now, not like a healing space, but like the peaceful center of a tempest. "He's alive." The cargo reached its destination. Someone beyond was manipulating events. Someone knew what she had accomplished, and they weren't going to dismiss it. Benny occupied his vehicle just beyond a weather-beaten structure. The signage overhead read, "Rusty Boots Veterans Bar and Grill." Only 3 vehicles occupied the lot, all pickup trucks, all covered in a light dust layer. He'd been passing the establishment for years, but had never once entered. He glanced down at the paper in his grasp, the same note that had been secured behind the hospital personnel entrance. He didn't know what he anticipated discovering here. Just an instinct, a thread he couldn't cease following. Inside, the establishment carried scents of wood treatment, aged grease, and whiskey. The illumination was subdued, the conversations hushed. On the walls, military insignias and monochrome photographs observed downward like silent sentinels. Several older individuals sat distributed across booths and bar seats, consuming drinks, observing a silenced television that displayed a football match nobody cared about. Benny approached the counter where a rough-looking individual with a white beard and substantial forearms cleaned a glass with a cloth that appeared older than the music machine. "Seeking someone?" the individual asked, not glancing upward. "Not precisely. I'm seeking explanations." That earned him a glance. "We provide beer and quietness. Explanations cost additional." Benny hesitated, then extracted the note from his pocket and slid it across the counter. The individual read it. His expression remained unchanged, but he ceased wiping. Following a pause, he nodded toward a booth in the rear where a figure sat solitary with a card deck, arranging them face downward like a game he never completed. "Speak with Curtis." Curtis glanced upward gradually when Benny approached. Late 60s, slender but not weak, with silver locks and eyes resembling glass spheres. Clear, impossible to interpret. "You're not military," he stated. "Correct," Benny acknowledged, sliding into the booth. "However, my companion, she received a gunshot wound assisting someone who was. I believe you possess information about what's occurring." Curtis examined him for an extended period. Then he reached across, flipped a card, Queen of Spades. "You don't pose questions like that unless you've already witnessed something. So I'll state this once." He leaned forward. "You ever hear of the Freedom Convoys?" Benny shook his head. "Not the demonstrations, not the ones in media coverage. I'm referring to something more established, more discreet. A small group of individuals, Marines, Rangers, operators who returned from combat and discovered a different type of battlefield awaiting. Bureaucrats, contractors, private enterprises exploiting our own people, ensnaring veterans into predatory employment, fraudulent benefits, compelled servicing under the surface. Individuals in debt, injured, instructed to remain silent and continue transporting." A chill traveled down his spine. "So, several of us decided to resist off the official records. when a veteran possessed evidence, documents, recordings, sometimes even someone who desired escape, we transported them discreetly, securely. No traces, no cellular towers, just engines and confidence. Curtis consumed a lengthy sip from his glass. The individual your companion rescued wasn't merely a Marine. That was a courier. He was transporting a ledger, names, dates, Shell Corporation addresses, the type of material people disappear over. And she positioned herself between him and a projectile. Benny swallowed with difficulty. Why didn't anyone inform law enforcement or media? Because then the operation's compromised. The mission concludes. The individuals behind it eliminate evidence and retreat further underground. Your companion preserved the mission, and consequently, individuals who exploit their own will face exposure. Curtis slid the Queen of Spades toward him. However, the world doesn't get to learn about heroes like her. Not in news stories. Only here. He tapped his torso. And here, he tapped the card. That evening, the atmosphere transformed to an oily gray as a summer tempest approached. Thunder resonated deeply like far-off artillery as Teresa reclined in her hospital bed, observing raindrops trace down the window glass. Her limb ached minimally now. The personnel still displayed kindness toward her, but a different atmosphere had emerged lately. Strange visitors passing by, excessive blank expressions that didn't belong to patients. She knew Benny was discovering something, but even he hadn't prepared her for what occurred next at a firm knock. Then the entrance opened. The individual who entered moved with intention. Despite his worn footwear and time-lined expression, square shoulders, steel gray locks cropped short, a lengthy tan coat with a Marine Corps pin on the collar. "Miss Williams," he stated, "I'm Kennel Briggs." His presence occupied the room like an abrupt pressure alteration. Teresa straightened, heart racing. "You're military, retired, and unofficial in this capacity." He walked to her bed's base. "You did something nobody anticipated that evening. You made a decision instantaneously, and you rescued more lives than you'll ever realize." She stared at him. "The individual I assisted, he was part of something. Something dangerous." Colonel Briggs nodded. He was transporting crucial evidence to expose a smuggling network targeting veterans. Fraudulent benefit programs, illicit market labor, coercion. This has been occurring under everyone's awareness for years. The information he carried, sufficient to expose it completely. But the individuals operating it possessed power, wealth, and no moral compass. They were willing to kill to maintain its concealment. "And the cargo," she inquired, "what was it?" "A sealed file," he explained, "with names, locations, and a testimony from someone who survived their system. And he's alive. He is. Thanks to you." The mission wasn't compromised. However, we couldn't make it public. Excessive risks. Lives remain endangered. Teresa nodded gradually, processing everything. Colonel Briggs stepped forward and positioned a small item on her bedside surface. A dark cloth insignia stitched in faded golden thread, a winged wheel, a rifle, and below it a single phrase, "Semper Fi." "Those who understand the truth won't forget what you accomplished," he stated. "And those who don't need to." Then with a quiet nod, he departed. When the entrance clicked closed, Teresa sat in silence. Beyond, the storm intensified, rain pounding the windows. She rotated the insignia in her hands, the threads rough against her fingers. She thought of the individual in the storage area, of the projectile, of the eyes observing her now, not with suspicion, but with unexpressed gratitude. Whatever conflict had entered her life, she hadn't retreated from it. She had advanced forward, and someone had been rescued. The morning Teresa was released, the atmosphere hung low with dense, gray clouds, the type of morning that feels like the world is pausing in anticipation. She stood at the medical center entrance, a paper sack of possessions tucked under one arm, the other gripping a simple metal support cane. Her left limb, though stronger currently, still trembled with each step. Benny walked alongside her, unusually silent. He carried her bag and glanced over his shoulder once, as if perceiving something he couldn't articulate. The personnel had offered their courteous farewells, smiles, nods, a signature here and there. However, beneath their professionalism, Teresa still sensed the chill of disbelief in their eyes, the unspoken doubt that had pursued her since that initial evening. She didn't hold it against them anymore. Some truths simply weren't meant for official records. She stepped outside and halted, arranged in absolute silence across the medical center parking lot's distant end were 12 trucks. Full-sized rigs, long-distance haulers, weathered and dignified, positioned with military exactness. Each one was distinct, different colors, different manufacturers, but they stood as one entity, shoulder to shoulder like soldiers on a final observation. And before each truck stood a figure, 12 of them at attention, wearing denim, work footwear, flannel, and canvas coats. To an outsider, they resembled any other truckers. But to Teresa, there was no confusion. Their stance, their demeanor, their silence, the tattoos on their arms emerging from rolled sleeves. Unit numbers, flags, marine insignias, some so faded they resembled ghosts from another existence. The wind stirred, catching her coat's loose edge. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Benny whispered, "Teresa." The operator from the central truck stepped forward. Broad shoulders, firm jaw, a clean-shaven face with storm gray eyes, sergeant stripes inked on his forearm, old but distinct. His work shirt was fastened to the collar, grease-stained at the sleeves. He stopped several feet from her, said nothing initially, then with a firm but quiet voice. "You didn't just rescue an individual. You kept our brother's sacrifices from being disrespected." She attempted to speak, but nothing emerged. Only the sound of distant wind and the quiet idling of a diesel engine. Behind Sergeant Cole, the 12 figures raised their hands. Not in a dramatic salute, but a quiet one. Low, steady, eyes focused on her. It lasted only a moment, and then without a word, they turned as one, climbed into their trucks, and one by one started their engines. The deep hum of diesel filled the atmosphere like a heartbeat returning to the earth. No sirens, no applause, just the sound of 12 rigs rolling out of the lot and disappearing down the highway. Later, as Teresa sat with Benny on a bench near the medical center's lawn edge, she still held the insignia Colonel Briggs had given her. She traced the threads with her fingers gently, like a child afraid of damaging something sacred. Benny looked over. "Are you managing?" She nodded gradually. "My father used to say something." Benny waited. Courage hides in plain sight. He nodded. "Feels like that's precisely what just occurred." Neither of them spoke for a while. Nobody else had witnessed what they witnessed. The nurses had returned to their duties. A couple of orderlies were on break, smoking and laughing by the loading area, unaware of the honor guard that had just arrived and departed like a passing storm. and "Oh, camera captured it." No headlines would document it. But Teresa didn't require that. The individual she assisted was alive. The cargo had reached its destination, and now she understood. Sometimes the individuals who protect the world most are the ones it never sees. She glanced down at the insignia again. Semper Fi, she whispered, not as a veteran or as a soldier, but as someone who had risen when it mattered most and had been quietly, permanently welcomed into a brotherhood she would never fully comprehend, but would always respect. And for her, that was sufficient. This account reminds us that genuine courage doesn't require a uniform. It responds when nobody's observing. If you were Teresa, would you have stopped to assist a stranger that evening? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Where are you viewing us from? If this account moved you, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more powerful tales of quiet heroes. See you in the next video.